Well, thank you for inviting me to share a little bit more about Amanzi and the way we do our work. It's been such a pleasure to chat with so many people, and I have prepared a number of slides just about how we approach our work with water in South Africa, but I really welcome you to ask as many questions as you want. So, yes, please, we can make this as informal as possible, and feel free to jump in with questions throughout. So again, I wanted to just share some of the images of the areas where we work and the people that we work with. But this is the first school that we've really partnered with this more innovative approach that is really looking at how do we create benefit to the schools, how do we create benefit to the students, and also how do we do this in a way that really is environmentally friendly as possible. So you can see this is our mission at the bottom of the slide. Amanzi Water to Schools partners with South African schools to develop sustainable water solutions and bridges to opportunities for students. So just a quick little geography lesson. I have learned that folks are not always super clear about where South Africa is, and also particularly the Eastern Cape. So the Eastern Cape is one of 9 provinces in South Africa, and it's the white or the cream-colored province that's highlighted on this map. And we were living in a town called Grahamstown that now has been renamed. It's actually Makonda now. Again, really the problem is that due to climate change and poor infrastructure, many schools in the Eastern Cape do not have reliable access to water. And because of that, without water, schools are forced to reduce instruction hours. So that means that sometimes the students are actually allowed to go home after 4 hours of instruction. And then sometimes if the school goes too long without water, they actually close. And the long-term result is, as much as it sounds fun, I actually was talking to about 200 sixth graders on Thursday, and I was like, what do you guys think? Would it be fun if school just closed at noon, or you just didn't have school because you had no water? And they were all like, yes, that would be so much fun. And I was like, yes, but the problem is when that happens every single day, and then eventually your school closes, that's when you start to not really have the most promising future. And it was really interesting to see that equation play out in their minds. And they're like, you're right. As much as we like having a snow day in Wyoming, we wouldn't like to not have school every single day. Again, the unemployment rates are really what drives this work. And if a child doesn't graduate from high school, their chance of unemployment is over 50%. So really hard to get a job. If they go on and graduate from high school, their chances of being unemployed for the long term in their life drop by over a half, so down to 26%. And then if they go on to the local university, where I also do some lecturing, and also the university that is subsidized for children from the region, then their chances of unemployment for life drop to under 6%. So it's a really quick escalation out of poverty if a child can actually complete school. Here's an example of one of our classrooms at the Riebeek East Combined School. And one of the things that I think is really important to note about our approach is that we do not make the decisions for the schools. This was a really critical piece for me when I started at Amanzi, because some of the other situations I had worked in, we would come in with the solutions and the school would just have to accept the solutions we were offering. Definitely flip the script with Amanzi, and really our plan now is we come in with a variety of these climate smart technologies, and then working with the school chooses the system that the school thinks will work best for them. And then also, again, through all of my various experiences in humanitarian work, I realized that water is just the start. And so if we keep a school open, that is just the beginning of all kinds of other needs being identified. And if there's a way that I can serve as a bridge to other organizations that can actually provide those solutions for the schools, that feels like the right thing to do. Organizations and groups like the Hannah Circle. So this is the current status of the school that we're working with, the Riebeek East Combined School. We have 93 students there. What's really important to note is that it is 45 kilometers, so that's 26 miles from the nearest neighboring schools, and that road, literally, it is a miracle when I don't get a flat tire on that road. I can't tell you how fast and good I've gotten at changing flat tires as a result of this road. And in fact, at one point when I was injured from some injuries I had sustained in an avalanche, I realized I couldn't go back because I literally didn't have the ability to bend my knee enough to be able to change a tire very, very quickly. So yeah, that is the reality of this road. And you know, prior to our work, there was no reliable water or sanitation system at the school. Again, we use only climate-friendly technology. We won't use technology that is not benefiting the planet. And we also really realize that communities are an ecosystem. And so we really work in this sensitive, synergistic way that strives to benefit the collective versus just the few. Here's some example of the water filters that I was able to implement thanks to the Hannah Circle. So these are literally the filters that the Hannah Circle implemented. And I just love the photo on what would be the left for you. You can just see how the kids, this was actually as South Africa was coming out of COVID, you can just see how interested they are in how these filters were working. And at that point, we were using dirty water that we were getting from the tanks, and using these filters to create drinkable water for the students. And that was literally the only way they had purified water for drinking.
How long does a filter last?
Yeah, great question. So the question was, how long does a filter last? You know, they say, according to the manufacturers of these filters, that they can last up to 2 years. But what was really interesting is that I visited a high school where I had implemented filters 4 years prior. And I was meeting with the students, and I had been asked to just introduce myself to these high school students, and I was like, so a long time ago, 4 years ago, I brought these filters here. I'm not sure if you guys heard about them, but we were using them to create clean drinking water. And they're like, oh yeah, those are the filters we still use every single day. And what's amazing is if the filters are cleaned appropriately and maintained, it's a gravity-fed system. If water is still flowing through the filter because it hasn't become clogged yet with sediment, it means that that water is still clean and able to be consumed. So these students had actually just done an extraordinary job of maintaining those filters. And they're like, oh yeah, they're locked away in the closet over there. So just goes to show that if it's something that's very valued, that the maintenance and the commitment to the maintenance can be high enough that these filters can last even longer. Great question. And then this is actually, this is a sort of series of photos about when we were putting the temporary relief pump that was sponsored by the Hannah Circle in at the Riebeek East School. And this was a huge advance for the school because we went from not having flowing water in the pipes to, thanks to this pump, literally having flowing water from the tanks to the kitchen every single day for the preparation of the 2 meals for the 93 students. So that was a game changer for the school, thanks to the Hannah Circle again. So this is the project we just completed last year, and we're still sorting out a few issues because nothing is straightforward in Africa for sure. But we started with an extensive rainwater harvesting system, so we resurfaced all of these roofs, and I was really lucky when I chose the school to partner with right off the bat, because the roofs were actually made out of corrugated iron. And a lot of times in South Africa, the roofs of schools are actually made out of asbestos, which is a little bit of a showstopper because replacing a roof is a lot harder than replacing the gutters. The gutters on the Riebeek East School were all asbestos, and you can see they were rotting. So getting those down off the buildings was a huge improvement for the health of the students. And then, honestly, the most expensive piece of the rainwater harvesting system was disposing of those asbestos gutters appropriately. I was really, really intent that we would not create more toxic garbage in South Africa. and so paid for this extensive environmental remediation of those gutters. We also installed a tank farm with 60,000 liters storage capacity, and so that was in addition to the 15,000 liters we had already established previously. That had been the 15,000 liters that your pump was attached to. We installed a backup pump to your pump so that the school always has flowing water. And then we also installed a UV light and a 3-part filtration system to filter the water. So the water now, the teachers who take it home every single day say that it tastes better than the water that they buy. So what's been amazing about the current rainfall patterns that we've had and our current situation with the tanks at the school is that we have enough water right now that students and teachers are able to take 5 liters of water home daily. And even yesterday, I was showing my mom, I got a WhatsApp message from my part-time employee over in South Africa, and she was showing me the water yesterday was literally like a dark orange color. And she was like, can I remind all the students they should be taking water home today? And I was like, absolutely, they should all be taking water home today. So this was the other piece that I was so thrilled to implement at Riva Geese, and also is something that we are very much going to be moving forward with. And a lot of times when I'm in my home community of Jackson, Wyoming, when I meet people, they're like, oh yeah, you're that woman who's doing that really cool work with water in South Africa. And it looks like most people are almost done with lunch. But what I always respond with is, and also, I'm doing the work with the poop in South Africa. Because what I have really realized is that you cannot talk about water without talking about sanitation, particularly when you have a country that is water insecure. And so for us, working hand in hand very, very closely with the school principal and the school governing body, we made the decision to transition entirely to waterless toilets. And that will be the way we proceed in this area as water security actually becomes even less secure moving forward. The other piece that I'm really, really thrilled about, and we will continue to partner with and also expand, is this carbon neutral concrete that we're making. And that's made out of the biomass from invasive plant species that's chipped up, and instead of sand and gravel, we replace sand and gravel in the concrete with this chipped biomass. This is a huge and important step for South Africa because invasive plants in South Africa are responsible for a lack of surface water. They end up, and I'm talking about things like eucalyptus trees, they end up soaking up so much of the surface water that the indigenous plants can't survive. The big issue with removing the invasive plants is that the only way to actually get rid of them, if you're not turning them into concrete, is to burn them, which contributes to carbon in the atmosphere. And so we're actually sequestering the carbon from these invasive plants in the concrete and also replacing these other materials that have such a much higher greenhouse gas emission because they have to be mined with those invasive plants. This is a little, and I actually timed this well because now we're going to talk briefly about toilets. But these are our waterless toilets, and basically what the waterless toilets do is they not only allow us to not waste any water with flushing, but they also will be producing a compost that we're going to eventually be using on our food garden. And we're going to be purifying the waste and also purifying the urine, and I can definitely talk more about that if you're interested, so that we actually are able to grow in the soil that is really, really challenging to grow, and there's a very high clay content in the soil. So this is the primary group that I've been working with for the last year. And as I mentioned, I now have this phenomenal part-time employee who's South African who's working with us as well. And then this is just kind of a closing slide so you can see the children that are really benefiting from this work. So yeah, I'd welcome any questions you may have.
You might talk about what they're wearing.
Oh, yeah. As you've probably noticed, all of the schools in South Africa actually have a school uniform. Like I grew up wearing a school uniform. And so this is the Riebeck's school uniform that all of the students are actually required to wear to school. And truthfully, a lot of these kids don't have many clothes. Like on Valentine's Day, they're able to wear regular clothes. It's probably for many of these students their one and only little outfit. So yeah, other questions?
Why is she talking, Daddy?
You said you got caught in that, just going off topic, but you said you got caught in an avalanche?
I did. I thought my mom had actually shared that at a,
With some of us.
yeah, in church. I just over a year ago, I was backcountry skiing and was caught in an avalanche. It was about 12 days before I was supposed to head back to South Africa. And as I was sharing with some of the folks earlier, it's about a 40-hour round or 40-hour trip to just get to South Africa. It's usually around 5 or 6 flights, dependent on how I fly. And yeah, it was a really, really close call. I was very lucky. I thought that it was likely going to be the end. And I was injured. I actually sustained 7 injuries in my right knee. Managed to get out. And interestingly, I actually had a week's worth of meetings set up with potential donors for this big system that we were hoping to implement as soon as we had the money fully fundraised. And when I managed to get out with my ski partner, which was quite hairy or hairball, I had lost my ice axe in the avalanche, and so I had to use his ice axe to like downside step about 1,000 vertical feet in this couloir with this.
You need to say what coolers are.
Okay, a couloir is basically it's a line in a mountain that has rock walls on either sides, and that's what I was skiing. And what happened was an avalanche actually came down from above. And that was what took me out. It came off the walls. There was a storm moving in, so it wasn't actually the snow. Well, there was a little bit of a slide in the snow that I was skiing, but it literally came onto me from above, from the rock walls, and I hit a wall, and my skis were locked onto my boots because I was skiing ice, and I didn't want to lose the ski. That's why they were locked on. So they didn't come off, and that's what led to my 7 injuries in my knees. I hit a wall and then went into a spin, and my knee blew up. But yeah, we got out that day, and I was like, if I can get out of this couloir, I can hobble into a coffee shop to have a meeting with a potential donor. And so I was told that I needed surgery immediately. I went and got an MRI, I got all the information, but I decided to postpone surgery until I had these meetings, and literally that week the entire project was funded. And so then I knew I had to go back to South Africa. So I decided to postpone getting surgery. And I still have not had surgery. I just ran 4 miles this morning, and I'm skiing and rock climbing and swimming and biking. And my knee seems to be doing great. So that was another miracle of Amanzi.
Could you maybe just give us a sample of like what the kids have for like their 2 meals a day at the school? 'Cause you said
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great question, Jan. So it literally does translate to 4 US cents a day per student, and that pays for 2 meals. They usually eat traditional food, so that will be like sampan beans, which actually has a pretty high protein content. But then oftentimes it'll be something like mealie meal, which is a corn. It's basically like, it'd be like if we took cornmeal and added water to it.
And the sand is also a corn product, isn't it?
Corn's also, yeah, Sam's also a corn product. So a lot of corn products, corn is called mealies over there, so that's why we call it mealie meal. And then if they're lucky, they'll have a little bit of vegetables, but it's usually just like a pile of mealie meal or samp and beans on this plate for them. So most of the kids are really, really badly malnourished. And I wasn't feeling as committed to doing the food garden until I brought a platter of sandwiches for participants who were doing interviews about the success of the rainwater harvesting project with me. And I had these extra sandwiches when we were done with the interviews. And so I basically, the kids were all hanging out, and I was like, do you guys want these sandwiches? And I literally witnessed kids getting in a physical fight with one another for just a scrap of one of these sandwiches. They were pulling the sandwiches apart. And that was when I went to the teachers and I was like, these kids are really, really hungry. And they're like, yeah, they are, Julia. This is what they eat. And this is also why schools can't close, because if the school closes, they don't even get that amount of food a lot of the time. And so that was when we really made the commitment to figure out how to use the waste from our waterless toilets for compost, and also how to put in this permaculture garden. So that's what we're going to be focused on in these next 6 months. And that garden, we have a 20-meter by 30-meter area for the garden, which is wonderful. It's large, so that would be about 60 feet by 90 feet. So it will be a big garden. But
Oh, and the church is also paid, you told me, for screening to keep the monkeys out.
yeah, one of the big expenses that we've had for the garden so far is we actually need to put shade cloth and fencing over the garden because of the vervet monkeys. So the monkeys will literally like rip the shade cloth open and just help themselves to anything in the garden. So we actually need to put jackal wire and shade cloth over the garden, which will help for reducing the amount of water that we're going to need to use for irrigation on the garden. But yes, I believe the Hannah Circle has already contributed to the cost of that too. So that's kind of our biggest cost, and also a drip irrigation system that we're going to be putting in. Yeah, Jan, I love your questions. Keep going.
What type of employment opportunities are available to people in this community? Like, are there any businesses or?
Jan, you are asking all the best questions. So my mom's aware that one of the big things that has really been a challenge this year is finding contractors who are familiar with these climate smart technologies, be it the waterless toilets, be it the installation of solar panels, the production and also use of this biomass insulated concrete. So on this last trip, I stopped in Johannesburg and I met with Youth Build South Africa that I'm now partnering with very, very closely. And we are actually moving forward with the idea of starting, they have these building academies in different areas. Actually, there's Youth Build America has some chapters here in the US, but they have these building academies all over the world where young, unemployed people who either have graduated from high school or even college but just don't have a job can go and study for a year and learn the trades. And so what we're going to be partnering on is actually establishing what we're calling a Green Construction Academy in the Eastern Cape, where we're going to be training up an annual cohort to know how to put in solar panels, to know how to create this carbon neutral concrete, to know how to put in the waterless toilets. And then I'm going to be hiring those graduates to do this work. But what I'm super excited about is the model that Youth Build uses is they actually have 60% girls learning these trades and 40% boys. And so I actually met with some of these girls in Johannesburg, and the boys were like, the girls are actually way better at doing drywall than we are. And the girls were like, yes, we are. So that's our plan, to create even more employment opportunities around these green technologies, because electrical system in South Africa is failing quickly. On this last trip, I was going about 12 hours a day without electricity. And so going off grid with solar is really essential. And that's the fastest, that's the most efficient way to do it versus wind for the individual. So that's kind of our bigger plan and our big vision for these next couple years, is to get the Green Building Academy going. We already have been offered this incredible space, this building that is absolutely historic within South Africa's sort of context, that houses the National Arts Festival, and they've already offered their building to us to establish the Green Building Academy. And otherwise, the economy, actually in Makonde, the economy is largely education, which is really interesting. We have numerous schools, private schools. We also have the university there, which is why my family ended up in Makonde. And so, but then there's also just all the trades. It's a community of 120,000 now.
And there were 7 blacks for each white. And the university wasn't in session, wasn't it something like that? What were
14
they
to
there?
1, actually. Yeah. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah, Bruce.
What percentage of the indigenous population graduate secondary?
Such a great question, Bruce. Well, so all the schools that Amanzi is working with are all black schools. I track the graduation rates very, very closely. Now, because of the establishment of democracy, some of the more expensive private schools are about 50% black South African students and 50% white, whereas when I was growing up there, those schools were entirely segregated. Relative to township schools, it's so dependent on the efficacy of the principals. So graduation rates can rise one year and drop the next. But some of the township schools where I've worked, we're seeing anywhere from a 70% graduation rate to one school in particular has a 100% graduation rate right now, which is just remarkable considering
You don't get that in the United States.
the challenges that these students are coming out of. Keep in mind, most of these students, in addition to being malnourished chronically, also are living in a hut without electricity, don't have access to water at home,
Or internet.
or internet.
And I
Exactly.
would guess that many of their parents perhaps are not real educated.
Most
To be able to
parents,
help.
exactly, Jan, most parents have not even graduated from the previous black schools under the apartheid regime. So yeah, these kids, it's not like they can take their homework to a parent at home and receive assistance. Yeah, great question. Yes?
Is there still, this is different though, but is there still warring factions there, or is it dangerous still there?
It's a great question. Yes, it's still dangerous there, very dangerous. It's not dangerous for the same reasons, like tribes aren't fighting with each other the way they were historically within South Africa, but crime is a huge issue there. I never feel safe there. I mean, that's the truth. And part of the reason why I've had to get so quick at being able to change a flat tire is when you're stranded on the side of a dirt road as a white woman, clearly may appear to have resources, it's a pretty unsafe position to be in. So that's why, for me, safety is being able to change a flat tire quickly, and you're constantly watching your back. Like, you live in these houses with burglar bars, with alarms on, with perimeters that will be triggering an alarm if someone enters, with gates and fences, electric fences, and it's still not safe. Yeah.
Two of the biggest things that bring on crime is poverty, economic
Exactly,
inequity,
Jan.
and a lack of hope.
Absolutely, Jan, you're nailing it. I'm not sure if everyone heard that, but what Jan said is that the two things that bring on crime are global inequity, poverty, and a loss of hope. And one of the big things that I feel so strongly about with this vision for the Green Construction Academy or the Green Building Academy is that it's bringing hope again. And for these kids, having a school that stays open, that's hope for them. And as soon as that school closes or there aren't any kind of opportunities for advancement, that's when the hope really dies.
Do they go to school all year long?
We have 4 terms in the year versus 2 semesters. So they have breaks in between the terms. Their biggest time period that they're out of school is in our summertime, their winter time, so June, July. But what's so interesting about this particular community that I chose to work in, Riebeck East, is that it is a community that really has been paralyzed by climate change. And so when I was growing up in Maconda, I remember that we used to get quite a few of our fruits and vegetables from the farms in Riebeck East. It was an agricultural community. And what's happened due to changing rainfall patterns is that most of those farmers have now converted their previous agricultural farms to game reserves because it's a lot easier to just have a game reserve where you don't need laborers and you don't need to irrigate land. And so we have a whole community that has an 87% unemployment rate that's basically paralyzed in place because there are no jobs available for them. And their only way out of this community is to walk out with everything on their back. And so there are no jobs anymore. Most people are existing on social grants. And so this community really is a great example of how communities are being impacted by climate change.
Are there any faith communities in this area?
You know, I'll tell you, Jan's question was, are there any faith communities? When we were singing the hymns, I was thinking about my friends in South Africa. Truthfully, my black friends in South Africa, they have the strongest faith that I've ever encountered. It's a Christian faith. They 100%, Sunday is like the day you go to church. And I was thinking about them because I was like, oh, they're just like 8 hours ahead of us right now. They've already been in church all day. Yeah, there's an extraordinarily strong belief. And I have had numerous occasions where when I've arrived at a school to meet with a principal or to even assist when I first was teaching in KwaZulu-Natal, that the principal and the teacher literally have been like, I know that God sent you to me because I've been praying. So I would say that the faith that I see exhibited in South Africa is like nothing else.
So what do they do for food and water when they're off of school? Like
Oh.
around here, they have these food things that they can come to the, middle school and have a lunch or.
Yeah, I mean, when COVID happened in South Africa, as you can imagine, COVID was so much harder in these kinds of communities than it was even here in the US, and it was really, really hard in the US. There were some food and some feeding schemes during COVID because no one knew when the schools would reopen. During the holidays right now, it sounds like kids somehow managed to be fed, but it's really indefinite. And even in talking to the kids, they're like, well, when I'm in school, I know I'm getting breakfast and lunch. A lot of these kids don't eat dinner, so they're just waiting until they have breakfast and lunch the next day. Yeah. And again, most of the folks who are unemployed, the 87% that are unemployed in this community, they are receiving minimal, nominal social grants, and that's how they buy food for their family, but oftentimes there's not enough to go around.
Sort of like welfare?
Yeah, like welfare, exactly. But really, really low. The majority of the households, which are in this particular community, around 4, it's something like 4.3 per household, according to the census data, are existing on less than $2 a day. So a household of 4 existing on less than $2 a day.
Are these like food deserts?
Absolutely. And so one of the things, like the nearest stores, there's a little spaza shop in Riebeck East, and it sells like Coca-Cola and bread, and that's pretty much it, and milk. the nearest big stores are 45 kilometers, and you have to pay for transportation to get to that community, Makanda, and then you have to pay for transportation back. And that is about it's about $3 to pay round trip. So that's a lot of money to go to the store. And so our whole vision with this garden is to basically demonstrate that if you use the correct gardening techniques, you can actually grow some of your own food. So our idea with all of this work at the Rebecca School is to be a prototype for other schools, but also to be a prototype for the community, to really show what can be done.
When you were working for Untadi, I think it was, you learned about dooryard gardens. You might talk about those too, because that is something these families could do.
Absolutely. So my mom was asking, when I worked in the township right after Mandela was elected, I was a home food gardening coordinator, and I would go house to house, and we would teach permaculture gardening techniques. What I'm super fortunate, again, another miracle of Amanzi that has happened, but one of the things that has been super fortunate is that my current part-time employee in South Africa also has a background teaching permaculture gardening in the township outside of Cape Town, Kailicha. And she's also already implemented a permaculture garden on her own property that's like a stone's throw from the school. And we ate the spinach from her garden, and it was just phenomenal. It was so good, and she has tomatoes. Like, she's just doing an amazing job. So our plan is to really show at the school that this is something that can be done, and then hopefully with the idea that we can work with these families of the students at the school so that they can actually implement a smaller garden on their own property. Yeah, Bruce.
Apartheid is officially over. How integrated is the society?
Such a great question. Yeah, so apartheid officially ended in 1994 when Mandela was elected president. And I hope everyone heard Bruce's question. He asked how integrated the country is now. The country has changed in the sense that if you have money, you have access to opportunity. And some Black South Africans have a tremendous amount of money, which is fantastic because they do have these opportunities. The reality is that the majority of poor South Africans are no better off than they were, except the fact that they have fundamental human rights established for them. And that is nothing, like, we need to acknowledge that is probably the most important thing. However, in their day-to-day life, not much has changed for them. So 100% South Africa has one of the most progressive constitutions in the whole world right now. And thank goodness everyone has the right to vote, and everyone has a right to water, is what the Constitution says. And yet at the same time, most people don't have access to water. So water and education are enshrined in the South African Constitution as human rights assured to all citizens. And yet, in reality, the poor of South Africa still don't have access to those. So, yes, it's phenomenal that South Africa has come as far as it has relative to constitutional rights for their citizens. And yet, the day-to-day reality hasn't changed that much for poor people.
Which is so much what Pastor Jan was saying today, that the wealth is there in the world, it's just not distributed.
Yeah. I read, and I actually didn't even finish the book, but I read the beginnings of The End of Poverty, which is written by an MIT economist. And his theory as an MIT economist was that if you took 2% of the wealth of the billionaires of this world, you could completely eradicate extreme poverty throughout the entire world. And he defined extreme poverty as not having access to food, education, and water. So if you just took 2% of the billionaire wealth,
And what
you
are
could
they doing
eradicate
with it?
all of it
I
worldwide.
mean, when you have that much money, what the heck are you doing with it?
Exactly.
Other than staring at it.
Yeah.
I don't understand. Of course, compared to the people that you're helping, I'm filthy rich, and sometimes have pride on my hand too.
I mean, I feel like I walk this very, very fine line of recognition around global inequity, because when I'm in South Africa, I am perceived as someone who has abundant resources. When I'm in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, which is the wealthiest community in the whole world, I am the poorest of the poor. And so it's this beautiful balance that I hold. And I feel like it's really about what can we give. It's really not how much. Certainly those billionaires, 2% would probably be negligible for them to eradicate extreme poverty in the world if they felt so inclined. But I've really come to this belief that it's like, if you are engaging, if you care, if you acknowledge how fortunate you are, it doesn't matter if you give a penny or if you give $1 million, you're still part of the solution.
How much rainwater does that area get per year?
Another great question. So when we were looking at the rainwater harvesting, I'm just going to go back to one of the, so you can see the school buildings have great rainwater harvesting potential. Where I got super lucky with this school, and it wasn't, I shouldn't say luck, it was a strategic decision on my part. Like I was like, I need a school that has good buildings and good roofs. What we ended up doing was 2 different research projects around rainwater in the area. And so we took the square meterage of the, we took the square meterage of the roofs, and then I actually had one of the Rhodes University students that I was teaching, he turned this into his 4th year honors project, and he took the rainfall data from 3 different weather stations that triangulated around the school, and figured out that with the square meterage we had on the roofs, that we would have enough rainfall annually to fill our 75,000 liters of storage. Even more importantly, I made friends with a farmer who has a farm that's a half a mile from the school, and I went and I had a 4-hour British tea with him and his wife, and convinced him to give me 60 years of rainfall data that he had been tracking on his farm. And so I got the most impressive Excel spreadsheet I've ever seen in my life. And we were able to plug that into the computer model at Rhodes University to substantiate again what the first university student had concluded, and that was that we would have enough rainfall to fill the 75,000 liters. What we're seeing in South Africa right now is that rainfall is actually not, we always had a weak rainfall trend, but it's not actually diminishing. What is happening is that the temperatures are going up, and so evaporation is actually increasing. And so that's why we have even less water. But we are part of this cycle of flooding right now in countries that are being impacted by climate change. And so we're still getting rain. It's usually in a flood version. But if we can capture that off these roofs and fill our tanks, it's worth it.
Is it humid in South Africa?
So humid. I look like I have a perm in South Africa.
I mean, I noticed that I've seen some images of green grass. That's why.
Yes, exactly. It's really humid. Yeah, that's a great question. So this was taken in the summertime. Summertime is when we get rain in South Africa, and then you'll go months without getting any rain. And a lot of time it's called they call it mist. So it's very, very light rainfall. But thankfully, with our new roofs, like even that can start to fill the tanks. And just last week it rained for 4 days straight, and my employee was telling me the tanks were overflowing again. So that was really good.
So So you need to put more tanks in, so you can.
I know. We landed at the 60,000 because we knew that would provide enough water security, not only for the drinking water needs, the hand washing needs, the food preparation needs, but also would give us enough water stored daily so that every single student could take 5 liters home a day if they wanted to. And that was kind of where we had our calculations relative to the rainfall data, but certainly if our tanks keep on overflowing, I would consider putting more in.
Of course, it's not that bad that it goes back into the earth for some other
Exactly,
places.
for the groundwater, you're exactly right, Jan. So we don't want to be
Too green.
impacting the groundwater too much. Any other questions?
Has the population itself gone up or down?
This-
Here in the United States, people don't have as many children as they used to.
In this particular community, the population's going down because it's just really, really hard to survive. What we're seeing in South Africa, and this is something that I studied in my master's degree, is real migration patterns being driven by the climate. So truly like climate change refugees. And so people are migrating to places that have greater water security, greater electrical security with the electrical grid. And for instance, Cape Town, which is like a first world country compared to where I do my work, they actually have it set up so that when the whole country is on one stage of not having enough electricity, so basically we have stages 1 through 6. If you're on stage 1, you don't have electricity for 2 hours a day. If you are on stage 6, you don't have it for 12 hours a day. And so you just live somewhere in the stages. So every day you're checking your phone to be like, oh, what stage are we on today? Oh, we're stage 4. That means 8 hours without electricity. But Cape Town set it up because they are adding to the electrical grid with renewable energy. So they're always one stage lower than the rest of the country. So if we're at stage 4 in the Eastern Cape, they're stage 3. And so people are moving to Cape Town because there's water there, there's electricity there, and
Jobs.
and their jobs. And the Eastern Cape is really seeing this, mass exodus that is, 100% happening across the country. People actually leaving South Africa itself, but the Eastern Cape itself is losing people.
When the rain falls, do you still have to filter it, or can you just drink it from the sky?
Yeah. So, great question. It's we think it's safest to filter. So we actually have a 3-part filtration system in the kitchen of the school that filters out first like the larger sediment, and then it goes through this 3-part system. I think it's a carbon filter that we're using at one point. And then we actually run it through this UV light that provides full purification. So, and then that water is the water that comes out of the faucet in the kitchen. And then we have, you might remember the faucet from the video where the kids were filling up outside. Yeah, in the bucket, exactly. That one's also purified water. So we set it up so that we had a faucet where kids could always fill up. And that's purified water, and the kids know that's where to go for purified water.
What are the other vegetables that are grown in the farms?
Yeah, so we have, we'll be growing all the vegetables that grow in this region. We're going to do a really big focus on dark green leafy vegetables because they grow quite well. So it'll be spinach. We'll definitely be doing some cabbage as well. My employee actually put together the whole plan. It was amazing. In addition to that, we're doing a bunch of squashes as well. Like, we're trying to go as high nutritional content as possible. Tomatoes. We're going to have some fruit trees in the garden as well. Beetroot, potatoes, or beets. Sorry, they're called beetroot in South Africa. Beets, potato, carrots. And we will be planting according to the permaculture way of, like, not all of the crops are, like, it's not going to be like, here's the spinach, here's the squash, but they'll be all integrated with one another. And our plan is to have the students themselves are going to take a significant role of responsibility with making sure that the area is weeded. They're going to be part of the original planting. So we're going to use this as a learning experience for the students as well.
So when they start the planting, the students are allowed to take like a plant or so home, or no?
Yeah, I mean, that would be a great idea. We haven't decided yet relative to that, but our thought is that the students are going to be part of daily maintaining the garden, and then they're going to be harvesting these vegetables every day to be used in their meals. Yeah. And then again, the idea is very much like, how can we motivate people to do similar gardens, you know, at their hut, at home. Yeah. So, and actually I should add, we're in the process, we're probably going to hire 3 unemployed youth from the community, anywhere from 16 to 34 years of age, and they're going to be responsible for maintaining our waterless toilets. We're going to actually integrate it into this whole fitness routine for them, because to maintain the toilets, you actually have to open and close these toilet lids to advance the waste through the system so that it dries appropriately. And the lids are really heavy, so my employee connected me with a woman who actually used to do CrossFit. She's American. And so we're going to essentially build out a CrossFit workout for these kids where they're opening and closing the toilet lids. And then they also will be involved in developing the whole garden.
And how are your finances doing?
Amanzi has been its own miracle. Money just comes the way it's supposed to. I read this amazing book early on that was recommended by a donor called The Soul of Money. And it's basically how money is supposed to flow like water. And when Amanzi needs resources, it seems that the resources flow to us. So I just continue to pray. We don't have a large budget. I wasn't paid for the majority of 2 years, but now I'm pulling in a salary that is a fraction of what I made at the hospital, but it's something. And yeah, I feel like Amanzi just continues to make the flow happen.
How many people have vehicles there?
Not many. In the township itself, there are a few vehicles, and usually when you see them on the road, they're totally loaded down with people because everyone's trying to get to town to shop. Oh, sorry. Yeah, a lot of times, if someone has a vehicle, it kind of turns into a taxi cab. And so the majority of people do not have a vehicle, and the majority of people are just getting around walking. Yeah.
You saw the sign with the potholes.
That's exactly right. The film crew who was there filming with me were like, these signs are hilarious, because they also, this was when this marketing film is a 2-minute film, and there's a film crew making a much larger film about the work right now, and they thought the pothole signs were absolutely hilarious until on the final day, exactly, Jan, I'm driving, and one of the filmmakers is in the back seat, and he's like, Julia, your tire's making a weird noise. And I was like, I thought he was just messing with me. I was like, Corey, stop it. And he was like, no, really, pull over. And sure enough, had a flat. And of course, I'm there with 3 men. It's 3 men who are filming. And I'm like, sweet, this will be, like, we'll have this tire changed in like 30 seconds. And they were like, no, Julia. We're going to film you as you change this tire. And I was in a nice outfit, and I was like belly down, crawling under the vehicle to find the right place to put the jack. But yeah, got that tire changed and made it to the school. And they did not have to go they actually were belly down filming me under the car. figure out where to put the
And they're
gel.
able to patch the tires there?
Yeah, this one was a crazy one though, Jan. This flat tire was, I don't even know how it happened. There was a stick that was like about this big that just literally had like lacerated and was stuck in the sidewall of my tire. So yeah, that one was not patchable. Yeah. Yeah, Lily, they, most children are walking about 2 kilometers a day to school. So that's like about 1.5 miles. And this is like the little ones. This is like the kindergartners are walking that far. And this is also why we're trying to do a little bit more work on how to make it easier for them to carry water home. Because a lot of the little ones, and I get it, don't necessarily want to carry 5 liters of water home. That's pretty heavy for them. So we're looking into making like some wheelbarrows that the kids can actually like wheel together so they could all push it together to get water home. Although truthfully, a lot of those kids are like, I just want to like play on my way home, not carry water.
They're still kids.
They're still kids, exactly.
Does anybody else have any questions for Julia? I think we could give her a big hand. And especially also
The ladies.
our ladies that did lunch and fed us along with all the contributions from everybody. And I think Julia will answer people if you've got specific
absolutely.
questions. Otherwise, I appreciate all of you for coming, and we look forward to seeing you another time. We know Julia, we know how to connect with her, and we'll have her back.
Thanks so much, Maggie.
I would like to just do a prayer before we go.
Thank you.
Dear Lord, we lift up your wonderful servant, Julia, and the wonderful work that she does. And we pray that you would continue to bless her and her work and grant her safe travels as she goes between here and Jackson Hole and South Africa and wherever her travels may lead. Thank you so much for this. In Jesus' name, amen.
One more thing, Julia. Here's some donated mine for you.
Oh my goodness, thank you. Wow. Thank you so much. This goes to the garden. Wow, thank you so much.